The night was still, the kind of quiet that wraps a small Oklahoma town just before dawn. It was 5 a.m., and the world outside David Miller's window held its breath. A faint breeze slipped through the cracked bedroom window, carrying the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of a world not yet awake. In the next room, his 9-year-old son, Ryan, slept soundly, curled under a blanket with a worn, stuffed bear tucked under his arm, a gift from his wife before cancer stole her away. David, a former Marine turned auto mechanic, had seen his share of darkness. He'd walked through war zones, buried his wife after a grueling fight with illness, and spent the last 2 years raising Ryan alone. But nothing could have prepared him for the terror that came knocking. A dull thud at the door shattered the silence, followed by a louder, more insistent bang. Someone wasn't asking for entry, they were demanding it. David's body tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol on his nightstand, unloaded, as always, with the magazine stored separately for Ryan's safety. But the air felt wrong, heavy with a threat he couldn't yet name. He froze, listening, until a voice barked from outside. "Neighborhood Patrol, open the door." Neighborhood Patrol. David's mind raced. He owned his land outright, paid his taxes, kept his yard tidy. There was no HOA, no neighborhood watch, nothing to justify this intrusion. A low rumble of dread settled in his chest. Then he heard the soft, panicked whimper of his son. Ryan was awake. The knocking had been loud enough to rattle the walls. David turned toward the hallway, but before he could move, a sound sliced through him like a blade, the creak of the front door swinging open. Ryan was heading toward it. David's instincts erupted. He bolted to the closet, tore open the safe, and slammed the magazine into his pistol with a precision honed by years of training. Every second stretched into eternity as he raced toward the front hall, his pulse a war drum, his focus razor-sharp. "Ryan, Ryan, get down." A voice bellowed from outside, thick with authority. David's blood turned to ice. "Dad." Ryan's scream tore through the house, raw with fear. "They're grabbing me." That cry, laced with panic and pain, rewrote David's world in an instant. Time slowed. The air vanished. The house shrank to a single point, the front door. David didn't walk. He moved like a predator, a charged weapon in hand, heart pounding like it had in the deserts of Iraq. But this wasn't a foreign battlefield. This was his home, and someone had dared to touch his son. The door didn't just open, it exploded outward as David tore through it. Outside, 2 men stood on his lawn, their silhouettes sharp against the moonlight. One wore a black jacket with a cheap plastic badge pinned to it, reading Community Enforcement. The other clutched a pair of flimsy handcuffs, the kind bought online, not issued by any real authority. They were dressed in black, mimicking law enforcement, but everything about them was off: the mismatched boots, the crooked patches, the aggressive swagger of men itching for a fight. In between them stood Ryan, his small frame trembling, eyes wide with terror, arms pinned by both men. He wasn't fighting back. He couldn't. He was just a boy. David's voice erupted, raw and unyielding. "Let go of my son, now." The man with the badge turned, annoyed but unafraid. "Sir, step back. We're conducting an arrest under Community Code Enforcement." David didn't blink. "There's no HOA here." The man smirked. "There is now. Section 9 of the revised charter." David stepped closer, his voice low, each word carved from years of discipline. "He's a child." The man with the cuffs glanced at his partner, then moved to snap a cuff on Ryan's wrist. Ryan cried out, a sound that shattered David's restraint. That was the moment everything changed. These weren't officers. They weren't even security. They were imposters, men who'd decided they could invent authority and wield it against a child in the dead of night. David's grip tightened on the pistol, his steps slow and deliberate. He saw the flicker of doubt in the man's eyes the moment he realized David was done talking. "Drop the cuffs," David said, raising the weapon. or I put a hole in both of you before you blink." The younger man's hands shot up, trembling, but the taller figure with dark hair and a smug grin didn't budge. "You wouldn't," he muttered. "This is official business." Click. The sound of David chambering a round cut through the night like thunder. His face was calm, but his eyes were locked, unyielding, the stare of a man who'd already made his choice. "You touched my son. You dragged him out here in the dark. I could press this trigger 3 times before you finish your next word. Want to test me?" The smirk vanished. The cuffs hit the ground with a dull clatter. Ryan broke free, stumbling into David's arms. David knelt, pulling his son close with one arm, the other still holding the Glock, steady and ready. "Down," he said coldly, facing the dirt, "hands where I can see them." The men hesitated, then complied, their bravado crumbling. David stood over them, Ryan clinging to his side, still shaking. "My neighbor's a retired cop," David said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute control. "He's on his way. You'll explain to him why you thought you could storm my property and touch my son." One of the men opened his mouth, but David moved faster than thought. He struck the ground beside the man's head with the pistol's frame, kicking up dust. "I said nothing," he growled. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. The moon cast long shadows across the lawn as David stood like a sentinel, an unbreakable shield between his son and the world. Minutes later, tires squealed in the distance. Tom Baker, the retired sheriff next door, arrived in a robe and mismatched slippers, flashlight in hand. One glance at David, Ryan curled against him, and the 2 men in the dirt told him everything. Tom didn't speak, didn't need to. He stepped inside, made a call, and within 15 minutes, the street blazed with red and blue. 7 patrol cars lined the curb, their spotlights bathing the lawn in harsh light. Neighbors peeked from windows, but none dared approach. At the center of it all stood Sergeant Sarah Jenkins, mid-40s, calm and unflinching. Her boots crunched on gravel as she surveyed the scene, the fake badges, the imitation uniforms, Ryan trembling in David's arms. "A warrant?" she asked the men, her voice sharp. One lifted his head. "We're under community protocol." "You have no authority to detain a minor," Jenkins cut in. This wasn't enforcement. This was trespassing, attempted abduction, and endangering a child. And that's just the start. She gestured toward the street, where federal agents were en route. The men fell silent, the weight of their actions settling like chains. David stood to the side, one arm around Ryan, his focus solely on his son's breathing, steadying him, shielding him from the chaos. David wasn't cuffed when they asked him to come to the station. It wasn't an arrest, just procedure. He nodded once, leaving Ryan with Jenkins and a trauma specialist. In the patrol car, he sat still, hands on his knees, the unloaded pistol beside him, magazines separate as the law required. The town was waking up outside, sprinklers hissing, joggers stretching. But inside, time moved slower, heavier. At the station, the questions were brief. "Why did you draw your weapon, Mr. Miller?" David's voice was even. "They were taking my son. No ID, no warrant. Handcuffs on a child. One had him by the neck. I warned them. I didn't fire, but I was ready." The captain nodded slowly. "Anything else?" David didn't pause. "If I'd been 30 seconds later, you'd be processing a child's death, not asking me questions." The room went quiet. The truth hung like smoke. The investigation unraveled the men's scheme. The leader, Paul Harrison, was a former HOA president, ousted after an audit exposed embezzlement. He'd nursed a grudge, believing the neighborhood had lost its order. His accomplice, Carl Webb, a shooting club regular with a penchant for vigilante rhetoric, shared his hunger for control. They'd formed an enforcement patrol complete with fake IDs and logos, targeting residents to reassert dominance. Messages between them revealed their plan: scare Ryan over a broken mailbox plate to discipline the community. They wanted David to react, They just didn't expect him to be a Marine who'd sworn to protect his son at all costs. The trial was a spectacle of quiet fury. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as prosecutor Susan Davies laid out the case. "This wasn't a mistake," she said. "They waited until night, wore uniforms to intimidate, and targeted a child, believing no one would stop them." The defense claimed confusion, citing outdated HOA rules. But the judge wasn't swayed. "You wore fake badges and brought a lie to a child's doorstep," he said. "That's not order. It's a fantasy of control that nearly cost a life." Harrison got 12 years, Webb 9. Both faced probation and a lifetime ban from contacting the Millers. The ruling landed like a hammer. No gasps, just the heavy exhale of justice. David skipped the trial. That morning, he and Ryan were at a park, the boy chasing a ball through the grass, his laughter a fragile but growing sound. For months, Ryan had avoided open spaces, but today felt different, a reclaiming. Journalists lingered nearby. One finally approached. "Mr. Miller, a statement?" David glanced at Ryan, who clutched his hand, smiling. "Men with weapons should never fear the law," David said. "But the law should fear the man who protects his child." He hoisted Ryan onto his shoulders and walked away, not fleeing, but moving forward. 3 months later, a knock came in broad daylight. David opened the door to 3 city officials led by Laura Bennett of the Community Safety Commission. "We're not here to enforce," she said. "We're here to thank you." She handed him an envelope with a city seal. Inside was a commendation, a police chief's letter, and a crayon card from school kids. "Thank you for being brave." The city has passed the Ryan Law, banning private patrols and mandating certified safety personnel. "It exists because you acted," Bennett said. Ryan, standing tall beside his father, smiled without fear. That night, after bedtime stories, David opened the safe. The Glock sat ready, magazines separate, a silent promise. He closed it, standing in the quiet hallway, not out of fear, but duty. Some nights, peace is a gift. Others, it's something you defend. And in that small Oklahoma town, everyone knew Paul Harrison and Carl Webb had picked the wrong house, the wrong boy, and the wrong father. The quiet of the Texas night had been shattered, but from the fragments, a stronger sense of community and justice had been forged, all because one father stood ready to protect his son against the darkness, real or imagined.